Catherine Ashford pressed her back against the cold ballroom wall, her father 3 weeks in the ground, his debts already clawing at her throat. Edward Vale was crossing the room toward her, and she had 30 seconds before everything she had left was gone. She did the only thing she could think of. She grabbed the arm of the nearest stranger, looked up into the darkest, quietest eyes she had ever seen and said, "Please, pretend to be my husband. Just for tonight." He looked down at her for one long moment. Then he said, "I already am." If you love a story about a woman who fights back with nothing but courage, subscribe to this channel. Follow Catherine's journey all the way to the end, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Catherine Ashford read it 3 times at the kitchen table of Ashford Manor, each time hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something survivable. They didn't. Dear Miss Ashford, in accordance with the outstanding debt of $4,200 held against the estate of the late Mr. Thomas Ashford, you are hereby notified that full repayment is due within 30 days of this correspondence. Failure to remit payment will result in legal proceedings to seize the property known as Ashford Manor, including all land, livestock, furnishings, and associated assets. Signed, Edward Vale, Vale Capital and Holdings, Boston, Massachusetts. She set the letter on the table. She picked up her coffee. She set the coffee back down without drinking it. $4,200. Her father had been dead for 22 days. She had $43 in the household account, a horse with a bad leg, and a cook who hadn't been paid in 6 weeks, and was only staying out of loyalty she didn't deserve. Miss Catherine. Martha the cook was standing in the doorway with a dish towel over one shoulder and an expression that said she'd already heard something she wasn't supposed to hear. "You all right?" "Perfectly fine," Catherine said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. That had always been her trick, the voice first, the falling apart later. "Martha, has anyone come to the door this morning? A man came round before sunrise." Martha's voice dropped. "Didn't give his name. Left that envelope with the boy at the gate." Catherine looked at the letter again. Edward Vale had not wasted a single day of mourning before coming for her. She had known Edward Vale for 6 years. She had watched him smile at her father across dinner tables, accept his brandy, compliment the manor. And all the while, he had been drawing up documents, calculating interest, waiting. Her father had borrowed money to keep the estate running through 2 bad harvests, and a drought that turned the south pasture to dust. He had believed Edward Vale was a friend. He had died believing it. Catherine was not her father. She folded the letter, tucked it into the pocket of her dress, and went to find her boots. The Hargrove Summer Gala was the event of the season in Boston society. Every year, Senator Hargrove opened the doors of his Beacon Hill estate, and half of Massachusetts walked through them. Politicians, merchants, landowners, lawyers, and every ambitious man with a good coat and a better lie. It was the kind of event Catherine had attended with her father every summer since she was 15, standing at his side while he shook hands and told her quietly which men to trust and which ones to watch. She was 23 now, arriving alone in a cream-colored gown that was 2 years out of fashion and didn't matter. She had come for one reason. There was a man here tonight who could help her. His name was Colonel Marcus Webb, a decorated officer with connections to the Boston courts and a reputation for dealing with men like Edward Vale. Her father had trusted him. He had attended the funeral. He had pressed her hand and said, "If you ever need anything, Miss Ashford," and she had been foolish enough to believe him. She found Colonel Webb in the east drawing room, standing with a glass of bourbon and a group of men who all laughed at the same time in the way men do when money is involved. He saw her. She watched his expression shift, not unkindly, but with that particular quality of now is not the time that men always seem to have ready for inconvenient women. "Miss Ashford." He stepped toward her, lowering his voice. "I wasn't expecting you tonight. I need to speak with you," she said. "About the Vale debt. I think there are grounds to contest the terms. If I could get access to the original, Catherine." He used her first name the way people do when they want to end a conversation. "This isn't the time or the place." "Then tell me when the time is." "The deadline is 30 days. I understand that, but... He glanced back at his companions. Look, Vale is a complicated man. He has friends in this room. If I start pulling at that thread publicly, it could... Could what? She said. Inconvenience you? His expression went carefully blank. I have to consider my position. She looked at him for one long moment. She had her father's debts, her father's manor, and $43. Colonel Webb had his position. She understood suddenly and completely that he was not going to help her. Of course, she said. Forgive me for interrupting your evening. She turned and walked back through the drawing room door. The ballroom was full of light and noise, and the particular kind of cruelty that masquerades as elegance. Catherine moved through it with her chin up and her hands clasped in front of her, and something very close to panic building behind her sternum. She needed a plan. She needed a lawyer. She needed $4,200, which she did not have, and 30 days to find it, which wasn't enough time. What she had instead was Edward Vale crossing the ballroom floor toward her with two men flanking him, and a smile on his face that she wanted to walk away from very quickly. She turned. She looked for a door, a crowd any direction that wasn't toward him. Miss Ashford? His voice carried. People nearby turned to look. What a pleasant surprise. She stopped walking. Running would be worse than standing still. She had always known that about Edward Vale, he liked it when people ran. It confirmed something he needed to believe about himself. She turned back around. Mr. Vale? Her voice was level. I didn't expect to see you here. I'm sure you didn't. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that looked trustworthy from a distance and didn't hold up to examination. I hope you received my correspondence. I did. And I hope you understand the timeline. I understand it clearly, she said. What I'd like to understand is the legal basis for the interest calculation. My father's original agreement with your firm showed a fixed rate of... Your father's original agreement, Vale said pleasantly, has been superseded by the terms he signed in January of last year. I have the document. The interest compounds quarterly. The math is quite straightforward. I'd like to see that document. I'm sure you would. He tilted his head. And you're welcome to bring a lawyer to my offices and review it at your convenience, though I'd suggest you do so promptly given your timeline. The two men behind him were watching her with the careful blankness of men who'd been paid to watch. Mr. Vale, she said, keeping her voice very quiet, my father trusted you. Something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt, she didn't think Vale was capable of guilt. Something more like recognition. Like she'd said something true, and he already knew it, and had decided a long time ago that it didn't matter. Your father, he said gently, was not always a careful businessman. I have every sympathy for your situation, but sentiment doesn't change the terms of a legal agreement. She held his gaze for 3 more seconds, because she'd counted to 3 before she didn't trust what would come out of her mouth next. Then she turned and walked in the other direction. She made it to the far edge of the ballroom before her hands started shaking. She pressed them flat against her sides and looked at the far wall and breathed through her nose the way her mother had taught her when she was small and frightened and couldn't let it show. 4 weeks. She had 4 weeks, $30 less than she needed, and no one in this room willing to stand between her and a man who had been patient enough to wait until her father was in the ground before collecting what he considered his. She needed a different approach. She needed someone Vale would take seriously. Someone with enough social standing that Vale couldn't simply dismiss them. Someone who, the man standing alone by the east window, had been there when she came in. She had noticed him the way you notice something that doesn't quite fit. Not because he was poorly dressed, because he wasn't the dark coat and waistcoat were finely cut, but because he was entirely still in a room full of movement. Most men at events like this were working the room, circulating, performing. He was simply standing, watching, like the whole thing was a matter of mild interest and nothing more. She didn't know who he was. She was out of options. Catherine Ashford crossed the ballroom floor, stopped in front of the still quiet man by the east window, and said the words she had not planned to say to anyone, ever. Sir, I know this is a profound imposition, and I'll understand completely if you refuse. But I need someone to pretend to be my husband for the next 20 minutes, and you are the only person in this room I haven't already asked for something and been turned down." The man turned from the window. His eyes were dark, not quite brown, not quite black, the kind of dark that absorbed light, rather than reflecting it. His face was composed, angular, the face of a man who'd made a habit of not showing what he was thinking. He looked at her for a long moment. She kept her chin level. She had already been humiliated tonight. She could survive one more refusal. 20 minutes, he said. His voice was low, unhurried. He had a slight southern edge to the words, Virginia maybe, or further south. Not Boston-born. Possibly 25, she admitted. There's a man here tonight who is trying to publicly pressure me over a debt I believe was fraudulently constructed, and if I appear to have a husband present, it will complicate his position considerably. The man looked across the ballroom. She watched his gaze find Edward Vale without any apparent difficulty, as if he'd already noted him before she arrived. "Vale," he said. It wasn't a question. "You know him," Catherine said. "I know of him." He looked back at her. "And I know your name, Miss Ashford. I was acquainted with your father." Something cold moved through her. "Then you know the situation. Enough of it." He was quiet for a moment. He had the quality of stillness that she associated with men who didn't speak until they had something worth saying. "You want me to stand beside you and imply a legal relationship that would give Vale pause?" "Yes." "That's a significant ask of a stranger." "I'm aware of that." She met his eyes directly. "I don't have better options tonight. I've tried 2 of them already, and they both had positions to consider." The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile, more like the ghost of one there and gone. "All right," he said. She blinked. "All right." "All right, Miss Ashford, for 20 minutes." He turned from the window, fully straightening his coat. "You'd better tell me your first name. A husband who doesn't know his wife's given name is a considerable liability." "Catherine," she said. "Catherine Ashford. Raphael Vane." He offered her his arm with the calm ease of a man who did this sort of thing regularly, which she suspected he did not. "Shall we?" She took his arm. It was steady and solid and completely without the performance she'd expected. He didn't lean into it. He didn't make a show. He simply walked beside her into the center of the ballroom like a man who had nowhere more important to be. Edward Vale saw them coming. She watched it happen, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the recalculation, the way his 2 men shifted almost imperceptibly. Vale was a man who processed information quickly. That was what made him dangerous. He was already adjusting. "Miss Ashford." His smile didn't change. "I see you've found company." "Mr. Vale." She let the words sit there without elaborating. Raphael said nothing. He stood beside her with his hands behind his back, looking at Vale with the particular quality of attention that made the other man seem to be the one being evaluated. Vale extended a hand. "I don't believe we've been introduced." Raphael Vane. He shook Vale's hand briefly without warmth. "I'm familiar with your work." "Are you?" Vale's smile shifted by some fraction of a degree. "In what capacity?" "Business." The word was flat and final. "Miss Ashford mentioned you've been in contact regarding her father's estate." "A private matter," Vale said smoothly. "Between myself and the family." "Of course." Raphael inclined his head slightly. "My wife tends to share private matters with me. We find it's more efficient." The word wife dropped into the conversation with the absolute calm of something that had been true for years. Catherine kept her face very still. She felt Vale's gaze cut to her and then back. "I was unaware of a marriage," Vale said. "It was a quiet affair," Catherine said. "Family only." "I see." Vale looked at Raphael with a different kind of attention, now the look of a man who is trying to place another man's name in the geography of power and not quite finding it. "And your interests are in?" "Several areas," Raphael said. including as of this year property law in the Commonwealth. The statutes around compound interest on private debts are particularly interesting reading. Vale was very still. Particularly the 1808 revision, Raphael continued pleasantly. The one that specifies documentation requirements for amended contract terms. If the original agreement specified a fixed rate, the amendment would need to have been signed, witnessed, and registered with the county clerk within 60 days of execution to be legally enforceable. Did you find, Mr. Vale, that that was the case with Mr. Ashford's account? The silence lasted 4 seconds. Catherine counted. I believe all documentation is in order, Vale said. His voice had changed by a register so subtle she almost missed it. Almost. Excellent. Raphael smiled for the first time, a small, entirely controlled thing. Then you won't mind if we send someone round to verify that with the county clerk's office on Monday morning. Vale looked at him. He looked at Catherine. He looked back. Not at all. He said very quietly, Wonderful. Raphael turned to Catherine with the ease of a man closing a book. I believe Senator Hargrove's wife was looking for you earlier. Should we go find her? Yes, Catherine said. I think we should. They walked away from Edward Vale without looking back. She waited until they were on the far side of the ballroom and nearly at the door before she let herself exhale. How do you know about the 1808 statute? She said. I read, Raphael said. That was considerably more than 20 minutes worth of preparation. I had some time while you were talking to Colonel Webb. He said it without inflection, the way you say something you're not intending as a pointed remark, which made it worse. I recognized Vale when I came in. I'd been watching him work the room. She stopped walking. He stopped with her, turning to look at her with that composed, attentive expression that she was beginning to understand was simply what his face did. You knew who he was before I approached you, she said slowly. Yes. And you knew my name before I gave it to you. Yes. You knew my father. I did. She looked at him. He held her gaze with the patient quiet of a man who was waiting for her to finish the equation and wasn't going to rush her. Who are you? She said. Raphael Vane looked at her for a long moment. Outside, through the tall windows, the summer night pressed dark and warm against the glass. The ballroom light caught the angles of his face and didn't quite illuminate all of it. Someone who has been watching what Vale has been doing to people in this city for a long time, he said. Someone who has been waiting for the right occasion to make that publicly complicated for him. And I provided the occasion. You provided the introduction, he said. The rest of it you did yourself. You walked into that ballroom alone. You asked Colonel Webb for help, and when he refused, you didn't collapse, you regrouped. You came to a stranger with a plan. That's not a woman who needs rescuing, Miss Ashford. He paused. Catherine. Her name in his mouth was different from how she had been expecting it to sound. So what happens Monday? She said. On Monday, he said. I have a colleague who works with the county clerk's office. Look at the documentation on your father's account. If Vale amended those terms without filing properly, and I believe he did, then the compound interest he's claiming is not legally enforceable. The debt still exists, but the amount he's claiming, that part falls apart. And if the documentation is in order, then we find another angle. He said it the same way he said everything else, without drama, without false certainty. Like a man who had stood in difficult rooms before and knew that most of them had doors if you looked for them. There's usually another angle. Catherine looked at him. She thought about her father 3 weeks gone, and the letter on the kitchen table, and the $43 in the account, and Colonel Webb's carefully blank face. Why, she said. Why what? Why help me? You don't owe me anything. He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that isn't avoiding the question, but is taking it seriously. Your father, he said finally, lent me money once, not a large amount. 8 years ago when I came to Boston with less than I have now and needed a bridge between two business dealings. He didn't ask for interest. He didn't ask for a lien. He paused. He just said, pay it back when you can, Mr. Vane, and look after whoever needs looking after." He looked at her directly. "I paid it back in 6 months. The second part took longer." Catherine Ashford stood in Senator Hargrove's ballroom on a summer night in 1815 and felt something shift somewhere in the architecture of the last 3 weeks. Some weight she'd been holding so long, she'd stopped noticing its shape. "Well," she said, and her voice came out rougher than she intended. "That sounds exactly like him." "Yes," Raphael Vane said quietly. "It does." Outside, the summer dark was soft and deep against the windows. Inside, the music played on, and somewhere across the ballroom, Edward Vale was standing with his 2 men and his pleasant smile and his documents, not yet knowing that Monday was coming. Catherine squared her shoulders. She thought about the letter on the kitchen table. She thought about the manor and the south pasture and the horse with the bad leg and Martha in the kitchen who hadn't been paid in 6 weeks. "Monday," she said. "Monday," he agreed. She looked at him, this quiet, still man who had known her name before she said it, and her father before she thought to ask, and the statute that might save her home, and she thought, "I don't know what this is, but it's something." Then she took a breath and straightened her spine and turned back toward the ballroom. There was still tonight to get through, and tonight, for the first time in 22 days, she did not feel entirely alone in it. The carriage ride back to Ashford Manor was the quietest 20 minutes Catherine had spent in 3 weeks. Not the quiet of peace, the quiet of a woman who had too many thoughts moving at once and not enough room to untangle them. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and watched the dark road slide past and tried to decide what exactly had happened tonight. She had walked into the Hargrove Gala with no allies and a deadline that was going to swallow her whole. She had walked out with a man's arm, a legal argument she hadn't known existed, and the name Raphael Vane lodged somewhere in her chest like a splinter she couldn't quite reach. He had known her father. He had watched Edward Vale work the room before she arrived. He had known the statute, known the county clerk's process, known exactly which words to say to make Vale's smile go tight at the corners. The question that kept returning quiet and persistent as a dripping faucet was why tonight. Vale had been operating in Boston for years. If Raphael Vane had been watching him for years, if he had resources, legal knowledge, connections, why had he been standing alone at a window at the Hargrove Gala instead of moving against Vale already? She filed that question somewhere. She could find it again. Martha was still awake when Catherine came in, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of cold tea and the particular expression of a woman who had been pretending not to wait. "Well," Martha said. "I may have accidentally acquired a husband," Catherine said. Martha looked at her for a long moment. "Should I make more coffee?" "Yes," Catherine said. "Probably." Sir, Monday arrived the way all deadlines do, faster than it should have. Catherine was at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning, with her father's account books open in front of her, when she heard the knock. Not at the front door. At the side gate, the working entrance, the one that meant someone knew the house. She went herself, because Martha was in the garden, and the boy was at the stable. Raphael Vane was standing at the side gate with a leather satchel over one shoulder, and a man beside him. She didn't know, younger, slight, with ink stains on his fingers, and the look of someone who'd been up since before sunrise without minding it. "Miss Ashford?" Raphael's voice was the same as it had been at the gala, unhurried level, that slight southern edge. "This is Thomas Carey. He works with the county clerk's office. He pulled the records on your father's account this morning." Thomas Carey was already reaching into the satchel. "Ma'am, the amendment Mr. Vale filed for your father's account, the one converting the fixed rate to compound interest, was filed on February 14th of last year. The original agreement was dated August of 1812. He spread 2 documents on the side gate post without being asked. The amendment should have been filed within 60 days of execution. It wasn't. It was filed 18 months later." Catherine looked at the documents. She looked at the dates. "So the compound interest isn't legally enforceable under the 1808 statute," Thomas Carey said. "You still owe the principal of the original loan, but the interest Vale is claiming the amount that takes the total to $4,200 that's built on the compound rate. Strip that out and you're looking at closer to $2,200. Still significant, but not the same number. Catherine pressed her hand flat against the gatepost and breathed. $2,200. Still more than she had. Still a number that could take the manor, but not the number Vale had been using like a door closing in front of her face. "What do we do with this?" she said. "We file a formal dispute with the county clerk," Raphael said. "It puts the calculation officially on record. Vale will have to respond. It doesn't make the debt disappear, but it gives you time, and it takes his leverage below what he needs to move quickly." He paused. "It also starts a paper trail, which matters if this goes further." How much further could it go? He looked at her directly. "Your father wasn't the only one. I've been looking into Vale's accounts for 8 months. There are at least 4 other families in Massachusetts who signed similar agreements with him. Similar late amendments, similar inflated totals." He let that land. "What Vale has been doing is systematic. It's not a mistake in your father's paperwork. It's a method." Catherine was quiet for a moment. "You're building a case against him." "I'm assembling information," Raphael said carefully. "What gets built from it depends on whether there are enough people willing to put their names on a dispute. And you need my name on this one first. Your father's name is on the original agreement. Your name is on the estate." "Yes." He held her gaze. "I won't pretend otherwise. I need you to file, and I need you to understand that when Vale receives the dispute notice, he won't be pleasant about it." She thought about the gala, Vale's smile going tight, his 2 men shifting, the way he'd said your father was not always a careful businessman with that soft particular cruelty. "File it," she said. The notice reached Edward Vale's offices on Wednesday afternoon. Catherine knew this because on Thursday morning, a man she didn't recognize came to the front door of Ashford Manor and asked for her by name. He was polite. He was well-dressed. He handed her a sealed envelope and left without a word. Inside the envelope was a single handwritten note in Vale's careful script. "Miss Ashford, I see you found assistance. I would caution you to consider carefully the quality of the advice you're receiving and the motivations behind it. Not everyone who offers help does so without expectation of return. I look forward to resolving this matter directly and promptly. Regards, E. Vale." She read it twice. Then she put it in the pocket of her apron and went back to the account books. He was trying to put doubt in her head about Raphael. That was the move, pull the ground out from under the one person she'd found who was willing to stand on it with her. It was a clean tactic, she'd give him that. And it worked on the part of her that was still turning over the question of why tonight in the back of her mind. She took the note to Raphael that afternoon. His offices were on State Street, a narrow building 2 floors unpretentious from the outside. She had expected something grander and then felt slightly embarrassed for expecting it. He read the note without expression and set it on his desk. "He moved faster than I thought he would," Raphael said. "What does that mean?" "It means he's nervous." He looked up at her. "Vale doesn't move fast. He's patient. Patience is his whole strategy. He waits. He calculates, he makes people feel the weight of time pressing on them before he acts. The fact that he sent this 2 days after the dispute filing means the filing landed harder than he expected. Or it means he's more dangerous than you thought." "Both can be true," Raphael said evenly. She sat down in the chair across from his desk, without being invited because she was tired and her feet hurt, and she had stopped caring about propriety somewhere around the 3rd sleepless night. "Is he right? About your motivations?" He didn't blink. "What specifically is he implying about my motivations?" "That you have an expectation of return." "He means money," Raphael said. "Or the estate. He's trying to make you see me as another version of him." He laced his fingers together on the desk. "Do you—" Catherine looked at him. She'd been looking at people her whole life. Her father had taught her that the same way he'd taught her to read account books and check the back pasture fence for rot. "Watch the hands, Katie. Watch what they do when they think you're not looking." Raphael Vane's hands were still on the desk. Open, nothing hidden. No, she said. But I want to know what you get out of this. I told you, your father. My father lent you money 8 years ago, she said. That doesn't explain 8 months of work building a case against Vale. That doesn't explain having a contact at the county clerk's office, or knowing the 1808 statute by heart, or being at the Hargrove Gala on the exact night I needed someone. She kept her voice level. What is it that you actually want, Mr. Vane? The silence stretched. Outside on State Street, a cart went by, wheels loud on the cobblestone. A door opened and closed somewhere below them. Vale took something from me, Raphael said. His voice was the same low, unhurried, but something underneath it had changed texture, like ground that looked firm and had a different quality when you actually put weight on it. 4 years ago, he continued, I had a business partner. We built a trade concern together over 6 years. Vale approached us for an investment, legitimate terms, documented correctly, everything in order. 18 months later, my partner was dead of a fever, and I was looking at amended paperwork I didn't recognize and a debt I didn't remember agreeing to. He paused. I lost the business. I rebuilt. But what Vale did was deliberate, and I know it was deliberate, and I have spent 4 years making sure that when I moved against him, I had enough that he couldn't simply make it disappear. Catherine was quiet. So yes, he said, I have motivations that aren't entirely about your father's debt. I won't pretend otherwise. You asked for honesty, and that's the honest answer. He met her eyes. But nothing I am doing will harm you. That I can promise. She sat with it for a moment. The weight of it. The way honesty, when it came from a person who didn't have to offer it, felt different from honesty extracted under pressure. All right, she said. All right. All right, Mr. Vane. She stood up. Then we're both getting something from this arrangement. That makes it a partnership. Partners should probably stop calling each other by formal titles after a certain point. Something moved through his expression, brief warm there and gone. Raphael, he said. Catherine, she said. I believe you already knew that. I did, he said, and this time the ghost of a smile stayed a half-second longer than it had before. She was halfway back to Ashford Manor when the second carriage appeared. She was on the Beacon Hill Road, the afternoon light going golden long across the grass. When she heard the horses behind her coming faster than a carriage should on a residential road, and wrong somehow, the sound of it. She turned. It wasn't a public coach. It was a private vehicle, dark, no markings, and it pulled alongside her before she could do anything sensible. And the man who leaned out of the window was not Edward Vale, but was absolutely one of the two men who had been standing behind Vale at the gala. Miss Ashford. He was polite. Professionally polite, the way men are when they've been paid to be. Mr. Vale would appreciate a word. Mr. Vale, Catherine said, keeping her voice even, can make an appointment. Mr. Vale prefers now. Her driver, old Thomas, who had driven for her father for 15 years, had gone very still on the box. She could see the set of his shoulders. She could see him not moving, and understanding that moving was not within his power in this moment. Catherine looked at the man in the window. She looked at the carriage door. She thought about the account books on her kitchen table, the $43 in the account, the $2,200 debt that had replaced the $4,200 but was still more than she had. She thought about what Raphael had said. When Vale receives the dispute notice, he won't be pleasant about it. He moved faster than I thought he would. Very well, she said. Edward Vale was not in his offices. He was at a private dining club on Bowden Street, all dark wood and old money, and the particular quiet of rooms where things were decided without being announced. He was the only person at the table when the man brought her in, which she understood was deliberate. He rose when she entered because he was always and exactly polite. Miss Ashford, thank you for coming. I had the impression it wasn't entirely optional, she said. Everything is optional. He gestured to the chair across from him. Sit, please. She sat. I want to speak to you plainly, Vale said. Without lawyers present. Without... He paused. Whatever Raphael Vane is to you. He's my husband, she said. He is not your husband. Vale said it with the quiet certainty of a man who had already checked. There is no record of a marriage between Catherine Ashford and any man named Vane in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I had my people look yesterday. He tilted his head. So whatever arrangement you've made with him, it is not what you represented it to be at the Hargrove Gala. Catherine's hands were flat on her thighs under the table. She kept her face entirely still. What is it you want, Mr. Vale? The same thing I've always wanted, settlement of your father's account. He folded his hands on the table. I am prepared to offer you a revised arrangement. Extended timeline 6 months instead of 30 days. In exchange for the dispute filing being withdrawn. 6 months still requires money I don't have. I am also prepared to consider a property arrangement, he said. The South 40 acres. Clean title transfer. That reduces the outstanding balance to $800, which is manageable. The South 40 acres. Her father had planted the south pasture with the second harvest after a drought year. He had stood at the fence line and told her, this land is what we're for. Katie, not the house, not the furniture, the land. No, she said. Vale looked at her. Miss Ashford. No, she said again. I'm not transferring the land. Then we returned to the original timeline and the original total. His voice didn't change. That was the thing about Vale. He didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten with volume. He just laid facts on the table like stones. And I would suggest very sincerely that you reconsider the quality of legal advice you're receiving. Mr. Vane has his own agenda with regard to my business affairs. You are a means to an end for him, nothing more. If you allow him to use your father's account as the opening move in his campaign against me, you will become collateral damage in a dispute that has nothing to do with your family. Catherine looked at him across the clean table in the quiet room. You are trying to make me afraid of him, she said. I am trying to make you careful, Vale said. There's a difference. Is there? She stood up. The chair scraped back loud in the quiet room. You had my father followed to meetings. You had his agreements amended after he signed them. You waited until he was 22 days in the ground before sending a notice to a woman living alone on a mortgaged estate. She kept her voice very flat, because she had learned watching him that flat was more devastating than loud. You want me to be careful of Raphael Vane. All right, I'm being careful. I'm being careful of every man in this room, Mr. Vale, including you. She walked to the door. The dispute stands, she said without turning around. Send your correspondence to State Street. She didn't look back. She was shaking by the time she reached the street. Not visibly, she'd learned that from her father too, but internally the long, slow tremor of adrenaline that had nowhere to go. She walked 3 blocks before she stopped walking and stood on the corner of Bowdoin and Cambridge streets and thought with great clarity that she had just done something either very brave or very stupid, and she genuinely could not determine which. Vale knew the marriage was false. That was the immediate problem. Whatever cover she and Raphael had constructed at the gala had lasted exactly 4 days before Vale's people had pulled it apart. And now he knew she was vulnerable, knew the protection was an illusion, and he still had the paperwork and the deadline, and the ability to be patient in a way that she was finding increasingly difficult to match. She needed to tell Raphael. She needed to tell him tonight. She turned toward State Street and started walking faster. He was still in his office. She could see the light in the upper window when she came around the corner, and something in her chest loosened slightly at the sight of it, this specific quality of relief that she associated with finding something you hadn't realized you'd been looking for. She took the stairs 2 at a time, which was not dignified, and which she didn't care about at all, and knocked without stopping to compose herself first. Come in. He was at his desk with papers spread in front of him, and his coat-off sleeves rolled to the elbow in the way of a man who'd been working for hours. He looked up when she came in, and something in his expression shifted before she'd said a word. What happened? He said. He knows the marriage is false, she said. He had it checked. There's no record. She sat down in the chair, the same chair as before, because her legs were making a suggestion she agreed with. He had me brought to a dining club on Bowden Street. Private meeting. He offered to extend the timeline to 6 months in exchange for withdrawing the dispute or take the South 40 acres in partial settlement. And you said no to both. She looked at him. He also said that you're using my father's account as the opening move in a campaign against him. That I'm collateral damage. Raphael was very still. Is that true? She said. Not the part about the campaign, I know that part. Is the part true where I become collateral damage? He stood up from the desk and came around it, which was the first time she'd seen him move quickly, and he crouched down in front of her chair, so he was at her level, and said with a directness she hadn't been expecting. No, that part is not true. The dispute protects you first. Whatever I'm building against Vale runs parallel to that, it doesn't override it. If at any point those two things come into conflict, yours takes precedence. He held her eyes. I should have told you that plainly at the beginning. I'm telling you now. She looked at him. His face was close, unguarded, in a way it hadn't been before, the careful composure slightly worn through at the edges. He knows the marriage was false, she said again. We don't have that cover anymore. Raphael Vane looked at her for a long moment. Then we fix that, he said quietly. She blinked. What does that mean? It means, he said, that if the protection was useful, there's a way to make it real. Not a performance this time. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, something careful and considered, and not at all casual. A legal arrangement. Documented, filed. Something Vale can't pull apart in 4 days because it will actually exist. He paused. I'm not asking you to feel something you don't feel. I'm asking you if you'd consider a practical arrangement that protects the estate and changes the ground we're standing on. Outside on State Street, a nightbird was calling somewhere, and the city was settling into its evening sounds, and Catherine Ashford sat in a wooden chair in a second-floor office and looked at a man she had known for 4 days, and thought about her father's land and her mother's kitchen, and the $43 in the household account, and the South 40 acres that she was not going to give to Edward Vale. You're asking me to actually marry you, she said. I'm asking you to consider it, he said. There's a difference. She almost laughed. It came out as something shorter and sharper, and he watched her with that steady attention and waited. Give me until tomorrow, she said. Of course, he said. He stood up and went back to his desk and picked up his papers again, like a man who had just said the most ordinary thing in the world and was content to wait for the answer. She sat for another minute in the quiet office on State Street. Then she stood up and straightened her skirt and went back down the stairs into the summer evening. She had until tomorrow. She already knew what she was going to say. She just needed the night to make sure the knowing was honest, and not only desperate, and that was the most frightening part of all. Because somewhere between the gala and the letter and Vale's careful smile and this quiet second-floor office, the line between desperate and honest had started to blur, and she was no longer entirely sure which side of it she was standing on. She didn't sleep. She lay in her father's house and listened to the summer night press against the windows and turned the question over and over, the way you turn a stone in your hand, not looking for an answer, yet just learning the weight of it. Raphael Vane had asked her to consider a legal arrangement, a documented marriage, something real enough that Edward Vale couldn't pull it apart in 4 days with a records check. He had said, I'm not asking you to feel something you don't feel. She kept coming back to that line, the careful precision of it, the way he had said it, like a man who was aware of exactly what he was offering and exactly what he was not claiming. No performance, no sentiment dressed up as practicality. The problem was that she wasn't entirely sure anymore what she felt. That was the thing she hadn't told him. Hadn't told Martha, who had gone to bed without asking, and was wise enough to know the asking could wait. 4 days was not enough time to feel anything about a person that was worth trusting. 4 days was crisis and adrenaline, and the particular intimacy of standing in a room with someone while everything outside it was trying to take something from you. That wasn't feeling. That was survival. She told herself that until the sky started to lighten. Then she got up, put on her boots, and went to find Martha. "He asked me to marry him," she said, standing in the kitchen doorway. Martha was cracking eggs into a bowl and didn't look up. "The man from the gala." "Yes." "Is it a real asking or a paper asking?" Catherine leaned against the doorframe. "He said practical arrangement, legal protection. He was very clear it wasn't—" She stopped. "He didn't claim feelings." Martha cracked another egg. "And what did you claim?" "I said I'd give him an answer today." Martha set down the bowl and turned around and looked at her with the expression she'd had since Catherine was 8 years old. The one that meant, "I am not going to tell you what to do, and you already know the answer anyway." "The land," Catherine said. "The land." Martha agreed. That was the whole conversation. It was also the whole answer. She was at Raphael's office by 8 in the morning. He was already there. She was starting to understand that he was always already there, the kind of man who treated sleep as a logistical requirement rather than a pleasure, and who was constitutionally incapable of leaving a problem alone overnight. He looked up when she came in. He didn't ask. He waited. "Yes," she said. "But I want terms in writing. Not because I don't trust you, because I've learned in the last 3 weeks that the only agreements worth having are the ones that don't rely on trust alone." Something moved through his expression, quick, warm, the look of a man who had just heard something he respected. "I was going to suggest the same thing. The estate stays in my name." "Agreed. The South 40 acres are not available to any debt settlement, mine or yours, without my written consent." "Agreed. If this arrangement ends for any reason, the property reverts to me cleanly with no claim." "Agreed." He was looking at her steadily. "Are there personal terms?" She had thought about this in the hours before dawn, lying in the dark, with the stone of the question turning in her hands. "Honesty," she said. "Whatever you know about Vale that touches this estate, I hear it when you hear it. Not after. Not when you've decided I can handle it." He held her gaze. "Agreed. And you tell me when the campaign against Vale is getting close to the line where it starts to use me as leverage instead of protect me." "That's the same term twice," he said quietly. "It bears repeating," she said. He nodded. "Then we're agreed." She crossed the room and sat down across from him. "How quickly can it be filed?" "Judge Elliott owes me a professional courtesy," Raphael said. "We can be in his chambers by noon." Catherine Ashford looked at the man across the desk. This quiet, careful, damaged man who had lost a business and a partner to the same person who was trying to take her land, and who had spent 4 years rebuilding himself into something that could fight back, and thought, "This is either the best decision I have ever made or the most catastrophic one, and I genuinely cannot tell the difference right now." "Noon," she said. "Fine." They were married in Judge Elliott's chambers at 12:15 on a Thursday in July of 1815, with Thomas Carey as witness, and a court clerk as the second signature, in a room that smelled of old paper and lemon oil, and the specific gravity of legal proceedings. The judge asked the questions. They answered them. Raphael's voice was level throughout. Hers was steadier than she expected. When it was done, they stood on the courthouse steps in the summer heat, and Catherine thought, "That's it then." She was Catherine Vane on paper. Ashford Manor was protected by a second legal wall. Edward Vale was about to check his records again and find something he couldn't pull apart. "Are you all right?" Raphael said. "I'm perfectly fine," she said automatically. He looked at her with the particular attention she was learning to read, the one that meant he'd heard the words and was also hearing everything she hadn't said behind them. "Catherine." "I'm adjusting," she said, which was more honest. "It's a lot to adjust to in a short amount of time." "Yes," he said. "It is." And he said it without qualification, without reassurance, without the automatic response of a person trying to smooth something over. He just acknowledged it. The way you acknowledge something real. that she thought was going to be the hardest part about him. Not the arrangement. Not the practicality of it. The fact that he kept being honest with her in ways she hadn't asked for and hadn't expected, and every time he did it, the ground shifted slightly under her feet. "What happens now?" she said. "Now we file the marriage record with the county clerk," he said. "And then I suggest you go home and let Martha feed you something because you look like you haven't slept, and I know I haven't. And Vale will know by Friday morning," he said. "And then we find out what his next move is." God. Vale's next move arrived not on Friday, but on Saturday, and it did not come as a letter. It came as 3 men on horseback at the front gate of Ashford Manor at 7 in the morning with a document Catherine had never seen before and a name on it she recognized immediately. The document was a prior claim. She stood at the front gate and read it twice the way she'd read Vale's first letter, hoping the words would rearrange. They didn't. According to the document, Edward Vale held a prior claim against the estate of Thomas Ashford, dating to 1809, 6 years before the debt. Catherine already knew about, 3 years before the amended agreement, written in her father's handwriting with his signature at the bottom and witnessed by a name she didn't recognize. A prior claim meant the debt predated everything. It meant even if the compound interest amendment was thrown out, even if the dispute was upheld. Vale had a foundational claim that sat underneath all of it like a root system. She sent the men away and went inside and sat down at the kitchen table with the document in front of her and felt something go cold and quiet in the center of her chest. Martha stood in the doorway. "How bad?" "Get me the horse," Catherine said. "The one with the good leg." Raphael read the document without expression. That was the thing she had come to rely on in 4, now 6 days. He didn't react with his face. He read, he processed, and then he told her what he actually thought, instead of what would be easiest to hear. "This is a forgery," he said. She looked up. "How do you know?" "Because I have the records from 1809 on your father's dealings with Vale." He went to the cabinet behind his desk and pulled a folder she hadn't seen before, thick with papers. "Your father didn't have contact with Vale's firm until 1811. I have the letter of introduction. I have the first meeting record. I have your father's own correspondence noting that he had not previously done business with Vale Capital." He spread 3 documents on the desk. If this prior claim dated to 1809, there would be a paper trail that starts in 1809. There isn't one, because it didn't happen. Catherine stared at the documents. He fabricated a 6-year-old debt. He fabricated a 6-year-old debt with your father's signature on it. Raphael's voice was even, but something underneath it was not. Which means he either forged the signature or he had access to a document your father signed for another purpose and altered it. Can we prove that? With time, yes. He looked at her directly. But this is Vale telling us something important. He is not going to settle quietly. He is not going to accept the dispute and renegotiate. He went home from the Hargrove Gala and started building contingency plans, and this is one of them. He paused. He is more rattled than I expected him to be. That is a remarkably calm thing to say about a forged document. I'm not calm about it, Raphael said, and something in his voice shifted just enough for her to hear it. The thing underneath the steadiness, the 4 years of accumulated fury that he kept at exactly 1 degree below the surface. I'm not calm. But losing my composure doesn't help you, so I'm setting it aside until it's useful. She looked at him across the desk. He has your father's signature, she said. Even if it's forged, proving it is forged takes time and costs money. Money I don't have. I have it. Raphael, I have it, he said again quietly. That's not a favor. That's the arrangement we agreed to. Your estate is mine to defend now too. The cost of defending it is mine to carry. He held her gaze. That's what the terms we wrote actually mean. She sat with that. The strange specific weight of it, someone else's resources, standing between her and a man who had been patient enough to forge a document 6 years back in time. He's going to escalate again, she said. Yes. What's the next move after this? After forged documentation, Raphael was quiet for a moment. He'll try to discredit one of us. Either the marriage itself suggests it was entered under fraud or me personally. He knows things about me, Catherine. About the business I lost, about the investigation I've been running. He's been watching me the same way I've been watching him. He looked at her steadily. There may be things that come out that are uncomfortable to explain. Then explain them now, she said, before they come out from his direction. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, 4 years ago when I lost the business, I was angry enough to do something I shouldn't have. I went to Vale's offices and I threatened him. Directly and specifically. There were witnesses. He didn't press charges because pressing charges would have required him to explain why I was angry, but he kept the record of it. He paused. If he uses that, it will look like this entire investigation is personal vendetta rather than legitimate legal action. Isn't it both? She said. He was quiet. You can want justice and also want it to be personal, she said. Those aren't mutually exclusive. What matters is whether what you've built holds up regardless of why you built it. She looked at him. Does it? Yes, he said. The documentation is real. The other families are real. The filing irregularities are real. The motivation behind finding them doesn't change what they are. Then when Vale uses the confrontation, we say the same thing I just said to you. She held his gaze. That's the answer. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression did the thing she was learning to watch for the slight shift. The brief warmth, there and then, carefully recomposed. Like a man who was not used to being handed back his own argument, improved. You're very good at this, he said. My father taught me to read contracts when I was 12, she said. And people aren't entirely different from contracts once you know what to look for. The week that followed was the quietest and most dangerous week Catherine had spent since her father died. Quiet because Vale went silent. No letters, no men at the gate, no polite notes from private dining clubs. Just nothing. Which was worse, she was learning, than letters. Letters meant Vale was reacting. Silence meant Vale was planning. Dangerous because she and Raphael were building something under time pressure that was supposed to look like a real marriage to anyone examining it, and the more time they spent in the same rooms, the more complicated it became to hold the line between the arrangement and whatever was actually happening. He came to the manor on Tuesday to review the account books. She had them spread across the kitchen table, all 3 years of them, everything she'd found in her father's desk, and they worked through them for 5 hours, while Martha moved quietly around them and pretended not to be paying attention. At one point, Raphael reached across the table to pull a ledger toward him, and his arm crossed hers, and he stopped and said, "Sorry," and moved back, and she said, "It's fine." And they went back to the accounts, and neither of them said anything about it. But she was aware of it for the rest of the afternoon in a way that was difficult to categorize and not useful to examine. On Wednesday, he brought Thomas Carey with him to discuss the forgery analysis, and she listened to an hour of careful legal language about handwriting comparisons and notary records, and how long it might take to formally prove what they both already knew was true. When Carey left, she walked Raphael to the door, and he paused on the threshold and said, "How are you sleeping?" "Adequately," she said. "That means no," he said. "It means adequately." She looked at him. "How are you sleeping?" He considered this for a moment. "Adequately," he said. She almost laughed. He did. It was brief and quiet, and the first time she'd heard it, a real laugh, not the controlled, almost smile he'd been deploying since the gala, and it changed his face entirely for the 2 seconds it lasted. Then it was gone, and he was composed again, and he said goodnight and walked down the path, and she stood in the doorway until his carriage turned the corner. This is a practical arrangement, she told herself. He said so himself. The problem was that practical arrangements in her experience didn't make the other person's laugh take up residence somewhere in your chest and stay there. Thursday was when everything changed. She was in her father's study, going through the last box of papers she hadn't opened yet, the one at the very back of the bottom drawer, the one she'd been avoiding because she wasn't ready, and then suddenly she'd run out of reasons not to be when she found the letter. Not Vale's letter, not the prior claim. Her father's letter. In her father's hand, dated March of 1814, addressed to no one, the kind of letter a person writes and then doesn't send, because they wrote it to think, instead of to communicate. She read it standing up, and by the third paragraph, she was sitting on the floor. Her father had known. Not about Vale's method, not about the other families, not about the systematic fraud. But he had known something was wrong with the amendment. He had written it down. I do not recall agreeing to compound terms. I have looked at the document Vale's man brought, and I cannot find in my memory the conversation where this was agreed. I signed in haste, and I should not have. I am writing this down because if something happens to me, I want there to be a record that I questioned it. He had known. He had questioned it. And then she checked the date again. March 1814. 14 months before he died, he had done nothing. Or hadn't been able to do anything. Or had decided to wait and run out of time. She sat on the study floor with the letter in her hands and felt grief hit her from a direction she hadn't expected. Not the soft grief of missing him, which she was used to by now, but the sharp, specific grief of knowing he had been carrying this alone and hadn't told her. Why didn't you tell me? She knew why. He had been protecting her. That was what he always did, right up until he couldn't anymore. She folded the letter very carefully and put it in her pocket and sat on the floor of his study for another 5 minutes, and then she stood up, because the letter was evidence, and evidence needed to be at Raphael's office before Vale could get to it first. She was out the front door in 3 minutes. Raphael read the letter standing at his desk, and she watched his face do something she hadn't seen it do yet. He went completely still. Not the composed stillness of a man processing information. The absolute stillness of a man who has just had something confirmed that he'd been afraid was true. He wrote this in March of last year, Raphael said. Yes. He was already sick by March of last year. She hadn't known that. How do you know that? I saw him in February, Raphael said. He didn't look well. I asked him about it, and he said it was a winter cold. He looked up from the letter. He was already aware that the amendment was fraudulent. He was already not well enough to fight it, and he wrote this down so that you would have it. He set the letter on the desk with the care of a person handling something irreplaceable. Your father was protecting you from the moment he understood the situation. Her throat closed. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment and looked at the window. This is evidence, she said when she could say anything. This is more than evidence, Raphael said. This is your father's testimony. In his own hand, dated, questioning the validity of the document Vale is relying on. A judge who sees this alongside the forgery timeline and the filing irregularities. He stopped. He looked at her directly. Catherine, this might be enough. Might be enough. After 3 weeks of $43 and forged prior claims and dining club meetings and letters with careful threats dressed up as concern. It's not over, she said because she needed to say it. No, he said. It's not over. Vale will challenge the letter. He'll say it's incomplete, that your father's memory was compromised, that it doesn't constitute a formal objection. He came around the desk and stood in front of her, not close enough to be anything other than what they were, but close enough that she could see his face clearly. But the ground just shifted, and he doesn't know it shifted yet. She looked at him. When do we tell him? We don't tell him, Raphael said. We file it, quietly, through Carrie, through the clerk's office, into the official record. By the time Vale finds out it exists, it'll be part of a proceeding he can't simply make disappear. She nodded. Her hands were still. Are you all right? He said. He knew, she said. He knew, and he didn't tell me, and he was trying to protect me, and instead, he left you a letter, Raphael said, and his voice was very quiet. He didn't know if he'd have time to fight it himself, so he left you the one thing that might let you fight it. He trusted you to find it. He paused. He wasn't wrong. She looked at him for a long moment. He trusted you too, she said. 8 years ago with the money. He trusted you. Yes, Raphael said. He was right about you. Something moved through Raphael's face, deep and brief and honest, the kind of expression that appears before a person has time to decide whether to allow it. I hope so, he said. I'm trying to be worth it. She was standing in Raphael Vane's office on a Thursday afternoon in July, with her father's letter in the pocket closest to her heart, and a prior claim forgery waiting to be dismantled, and a marriage certificate filed in the county records, and she thought with a clarity that arrived without warning and stayed, I am not standing here because of desperation anymore. She didn't say it, but she felt it settle in the way true things settle, not with noise, not with ceremony, just with the quiet weight of something that has found the place it belongs. Outside, the summer afternoon was pressing long and gold against the windows. Vale didn't know the ground had shifted, but it had. And somewhere in the architecture of everything that had happened in the last week, something else had shifted too, something that had nothing to do with documents or county clerks or legal proceedings, and everything to do with the man standing 3 feet from her who had just said, I'm trying to be worth it, like a person who meant it completely and had never said it to anyone before. She picked up the letter from his desk. She held it out to him. File it, she said. Tonight. He took it from her hand. His fingers brushed hers for 1 second. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then she turned and walked to the door, and he went to get his coat, and they went to the clerk's office together in the long summer evening while Vale sat somewhere in the city, still believing he held all the ground. He didn't. Not anymore. The clerk's office closed at 5. They filed the letter at 4:53. Thomas Carey was already there when they arrived, which meant Raphael had sent word ahead at some point during the afternoon, without telling her, which meant he had been thinking 3 steps ahead of the conversation the entire time they were having it. She filed that information away, in the part of her mind that was keeping track of who this man was piece by careful piece. The clerk stamped this document. Carey signed as witness. Raphael signed. Catherine signed with her married name, for the first time Catherine Vane, and the pen felt strange in her hand for exactly the 2 seconds it took to finish the signature, and then it didn't. Outside, Carey shook Raphael's hand and said, I'll have the forgery analysis ready by Monday, and walked away with the focused energy of a man who treated paperwork the way other men treated combat. Thank you, Catherine said to Raphael when Carey was gone. For what specifically? For sending word ahead to Carey. For knowing I'd say yes before I said it. She looked at him. For not making me feel like I was being managed. He was quiet for a moment. I sent word ahead because time mattered, not because I assumed your answer. I know, she said. That's why I'm thanking you. They walked back toward the manor in the cooling evening, and neither of them spoke for a long stretch, and the silence was the kind that had stopped being uncomfortable sometime in the last week, without either of them announcing it. Vale found out about the letter on Friday morning. She knew he found out because by Friday afternoon, Colonel Marcus Webb appeared at the front gate of Ashford Manor. Not one of Vale's men this time. Webb himself in his good coat hat in hand, with the expression of a man who had done a calculation and arrived at an answer he didn't like. Catherine stood at the gate and waited. Miss Ash. He stopped. Mrs. Vane, I heard about the marriage. Most of Boston has, I expect, she said. What can I do for you, Colonel? He shifted his weight. I want you to know what I said at the gala about not being able to help that was a mistaken judgment on my part. Was it? Vale came to see me yesterday, Webb said, and something in his voice had changed from the gala. The careful social ease was gone, replaced by something closer to real discomfort. He wanted me to provide a statement about your father's financial situation, that he'd known about the debt, that it was legitimate. Catherine held absolutely still. And what did you tell him? I told him I needed time to consider it. Webb met her eyes. I'm here because I don't intend to provide that statement, and because I should have helped you when you asked me at the gala. Why didn't you? The question came out flat and direct, and she didn't soften it because she was done softening things for men who had positions to consider. He had the grace to look ashamed. Vale has connections I was afraid of. I still am afraid of them. But what he's asking me to do now... He stopped. Your father was a good man. I won't put my name on a document that hurts his daughter. Catherine looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the gala standing in the drawing room, with her heart in her throat while he told her now was not the time. She thought about walking away from him and finding a stranger by a window instead. Would you be willing to say that, she said, officially, that Vale approached you for a supporting statement, and you declined, and the reason you declined? Webb blinked. You want me to go on record? Yes. He was quiet for a moment. She watched him work through it, the fear of Vale on one side, the version of himself he wanted to be on the other. She had seen her father make the same calculation once years ago, and knew that the answer a man gave in that moment was one of the true things about him. Yes, Webb said. I'll go on record. Monday morning, she said. State Street. Ask for Thomas Carey. She left him at the gate and went inside and told Martha, who said, in the particular tone that meant she was satisfied, but wasn't going to say so. Raphael came to the manor that evening, not for legal business. He came because she had sent him a note about Webb, and he had written back, I'll come by tonight if that's all right. And it was the first time he had asked instead of arriving with a purpose, and she noticed the difference. They sat in the kitchen because the parlor was her father's room still, and she wasn't ready to use it for ordinary evenings. And Martha put coffee on, and then made herself scarce with the practiced discretion of a woman who had been waiting for this particular evening since the gala. Webb coming forward changes things, Raphael said. How much? Vale asked him for a supporting statement. That means Vale was planning to use Webb's credibility to backstop the forgery timeline. Without that, he turned the coffee cup in his hands. The prior claim gets weaker. It's not gone, but it's weaker. He'll find someone else. Probably, Raphael said. But every person he approaches is a person who might do what Webb did instead. Come to us. And every person who comes to us is another piece of the pattern. Catherine was quiet for a moment. How many of the other families have you spoken to? 3 of the 4. The 4th is in Philadelphia. I have a letter out. Do they know about each other? Not yet, he said. I've been keeping the cases separate deliberately. Vale's lawyers would argue that we're coordinating to manufacture a pattern rather than document a real one. But we need them together eventually. We need them together in a courtroom, he said, with documentation that was assembled independently and arrives at the same conclusions. He looked at her. Your father's letter is the piece that makes the independent assembly credible. He wrote it alone in his own house 14 months before any of this started. No one could argue he was coordinating with me. She understood then fully for the first time why her father's letter had made Raphael go so still. It wasn't just evidence. It was the keystone, the piece that held the arch of everything else up. Her father, sick and alone in his study, writing a letter to no one, had built the strongest part of their case without knowing he was building anything at all. Her throat tightened. She picked up her coffee. When does this end? She said. I mean, is there a point where it's over? Where Vale is actually stopped and not just delayed? Raphael was quiet for a moment. If we can get the prior claim thrown out, the compound interest disputed successfully, and 2 of the other families to file simultaneously, Vale's business loses its legal standing to operate. He can challenge that. It takes time, but the kind of time that works against him, not us. He paused. 2 months, possibly 3. 2 or 3 months. She was 3 weeks into this already, and it felt like a year. 2 more months of Vale's silence, and his contingency plans, and his men at the gate, and his polite notes from private clubs. All right, she said. You don't have to sound resigned about it, he said, and there was something in his voice, dry, almost gentle, that was different from his usual careful evenness. I'm not resigned, she said. I'm accounting for the timeline. There's a difference between those 2 things. When I say it, yes. She looked at him across the kitchen table. When have you ever been resigned about anything? He considered this seriously the way he considered everything. Once, he said, after I lost the business. There was about a month where I thought this is what happens to people like me. I was born without the right name or the right money, and I built something, and he took it, and that's just the arrangement of the world. He turned the cup again. And then I got angry. And I decided I was going to make it not the arrangement of the world, at least for this one small part of it. She looked at him. What changed in that month? I went home, he said. Virginia, my mother's house. She still had the same kitchen table and the same cracked window latch that nobody ever fixed, and she made me sit down and eat something, and she said... He stopped. A half-second pause, personal and unpracticed. She said the people who take things count on you giving up, so don't give up. Not because you'll definitely win, just because giving up is what they want. Catherine was quiet. She sounds like Martha, she said finally. He laughed, brief, genuine, the real one she'd heard once before that changed his face. I think all the women who know what they're talking about sound like that eventually. She smiled. It arrived without her planning it, which was becoming a pattern with him. The second twist arrived on Saturday, and it didn't knock. It walked through the front door wearing a lawyer's coat and carrying a document that Catherine had never heard of and should have. His name was Gerald Ashe, and he represented a firm she didn't recognize, and he was at the front door of Ashford Manor at 9 in the morning with a sealed envelope and the practiced detachment of a man who delivered bad news professionally. She took the envelope, thanked him, closed the door, and opened it at the kitchen table. It was a lien. Not on the manor. On her father's personal accounts, the ones separate from the estate, the ones she hadn't known existed, because her father had maintained them privately, had apparently felt some need to keep them from her, in the way that fathers keep the weight of things from daughters they love and underestimate. The lien was held by Vale Capital and dated to 1812. It had been filed with a different clerk's office in a different county, and it predated the estate debt by a year. It was clean. It was documented. It had her father's real signature on it. She knew his signature, knew every variation of it from years of working accounts beside him, and it was real. $4,800. Not $4,200. Not $2,200. $4,800 with a separate filing in a separate county, quietly dormant for 3 years, and now activated. She sat at the kitchen table for 4 minutes. She counted them on the kitchen clock. Then she sent for Raphael. He arrived in 40 minutes, which was faster than the distance should have allowed, which meant he'd been moving before the boy finished saddling the horse. He read the lien document. He read it twice. He set it on the table. "This one is real," she said. "Yes," he said. The word sat in the kitchen like something heavy dropped. "He's been holding this for 3 years," she said. "Yes. He didn't use it until now because he didn't need to. The estate debt was enough to keep the pressure on. This is a reserve. Something he kept back in case the estate approach failed." "Yes," Raphael said. He was looking at the document with the expression she now associated with him doing 6 things at once behind his eyes, while his face stayed still. "The account it was filed against, do you know what it was for?" "No." She pressed her hands flat on the table. "I didn't know the account existed. I need to find out." He looked up at her. "Not to challenge the lien. The signature is real, you said that, and I believe you. But the terms of this debt, what it was borrowed for, how it was supposed to be repaid, those details matter. If your father borrowed money in 1812 and then died in 1815 without drawing on the account it was borrowed against, there may be a question about whether the debt was ever actually incurred in the functional sense." She stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It means..." He paused, choosing words carefully. "It means that sometimes Vale lent people money they didn't ask to draw. He made the arrangement, took the signature, filed the lien, and then waited. If your father never accessed those funds, the question becomes what exactly was he repaying, and did he ever receive the thing he agreed to repay?" The kitchen was very quiet. "You've seen this before," she said. Once, he said. With my partner. There was a loan we didn't remember agreeing to. We assumed it was a clerical confusion. It wasn't. Vale had created the paper and waited. He met her eyes. This is part of his method. The amendment, the prior claim, the dormant lien, all of it builds a structure that looks insurmountable from the outside. He constructs debt that is real in documentation and then buries people in the cost of challenging it. She looked at the document on the table. Can we challenge it? We can investigate it, he said. If your father never drew the funds, there should be a corresponding account at the lending institution that shows or doesn't show disbursement. If there was no disbursement, the lien is technically valid, but the debt is contestable on grounds of non-performance. How long does that take? Weeks, he said. 3, maybe 4. She made herself breathe. So he just bought himself more time. He bought himself more time and created new pressure, Raphael said. He wants you to feel buried. He wants the number to be so large and the timeline so complicated that you come back to the dining club and accept the land settlement. He paused. Don't. I wasn't planning to. I know. He said it with a quiet certainty that was not flattery. I'm saying it anyway because it needs to be said out loud. She looked at him across the kitchen table. The morning light was coming through the window behind her, and she could see him clearly. The tiredness around his eyes that matched hers. The set of his jaw that meant he was working through angles she hadn't found yet. The 4 years of patience and fury that ran underneath everything, like the deep current of a river that looked calm at the surface. What aren't you telling me? She said. He looked at her. There's something else, she said. You read that document twice, and you went still the second time in a different way than the first time. What did you see? He was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, the attorney who filed this lien, Gerald Ashe. What about him? He's not Vale's regular attorney. Vale has used the same firm for 12 years. Ashe is independent. He paused. Ashe is the same attorney who filed the amended terms on the prior claim forgery. She went still. He's the forger's filer, she said. He's the man who puts Vale's fraudulent documents into the official record and makes them look legitimate, Raphael said. Which means he is as culpable as Vale. And which means he stopped. Which means if we can prove the forgery, Ashe goes down with it. She finished. And Ashe knows that, Raphael said. Which means Ashe has an incentive that Vale doesn't have. She understood it a second before he said it. He might talk, she said. He might talk, Raphael confirmed. If he understands that the forgery case is strong enough that protecting Vale stops being worth the risk to himself. The kitchen was very quiet. That's your move, she said. That's the next move. It's a dangerous one, Raphael said. If I approach Ashe and he reports it to Vale, Vale knows exactly how far we've gotten and what we're building. And if you don't approach him and he keeps filing Vale's documents, we're 3 months from having something that might hold up in court, and he has 30 days to file the next thing. Raphael looked at her directly. Yes? Then you approach him, she said. You approach him carefully, and you let him understand the shape of what's coming without showing him everything, and you see which way he falls. He held her gaze for a moment. You're very good at this, he said again, the same words as before, but carrying something different this time, not just respect, something fuller, something that sat closer to the chest. I'm learning from you, she said honestly. No, he said quietly. You're doing this yourself. I'm just the one with the precedence. Ashe agreed to meet on Wednesday, not in his offices. In a coffee house on Congress Street that was public enough to be safe and private enough to be honest. Raphael went alone, which Catherine had argued against and lost, because he made the reasonable point that bringing his wife to a witness negotiation would either intimidate the man or make him feel cornered, neither of which was useful. She waited at the manor. She was bad at waiting, which Martha pointed out was genetic, having watched her father pace the same kitchen floor for the same reasons 15 years before. At 4 o'clock, Raphael came back. She met him at the gate because she had stopped pretending she wasn't watching for him. His expression told her before his words did. Not relief, not victory. Something more complicated. The expression of a person who has pulled a thread and found it attached to something larger than they expected. "What did he say?" she said. "He said," Raphael said carefully, walking through the gate, "that he filed 4 documents for Vale in the last 18 months that he believed to be fraudulent. Not just ours. 4. She stopped walking. 4 families. Your father's account was the second one. The first was a family in Concord. The third is in Plymouth. The fourth—" He stopped on the path and turned to face her. "The fourth is a women's charitable institution in Cambridge. A school." She stared at him. "Vale has been running this against a school," she said. "A school founded and operated by women with no male trustees and no standing to bring a legal claim without a male signatory." Raphael's voice was very flat. "Which is why he chose them. He calculated that they couldn't fight." The anger came in slow and clean and total, the way the worst anger always does, not hot, not fast, but cold and comprehensive, filling every corner. "What does Ash want?" she said. "Protection," Raphael said. "He wants documentation that he cooperated filed before any proceedings begin, so that when this goes to court, he is positioned as a witness rather than a co-conspirator." "Can you give him that?" "With Judge Elliott, yes." "Then give it to him," she said. "And get the school's information. Whatever they need to file, we file it with ours." Raphael looked at her. He looked at her the way he had in the study when she'd handed him the letter, that deep, brief, honest thing that arrived before he had time to decide whether to allow it. "You know what this means," he said. "If we bring in all 4 cases, this stops being a dispute about your father's estate. It becomes a public fraud case. Vale will fight it with everything he has." "I know," she said. "It will take longer. It will be harder. There will be more nights like the last 3 weeks." "I know," she said again. "Do it anyway." He was quiet for a moment. The afternoon light was long on the path between them, and somewhere in the back garden, Martha was talking to the horse in the manner of someone who had long since stopped distinguishing between audiences. "Your father," Raphael said, "would have done the same thing." She felt that land somewhere deep and true. "Yes," she said, "he would have." She turned and walked back toward the house, and he fell into step beside her, and for a moment they were just 2 people walking up a path in the late summer afternoon, carrying between them something that had started as a debt and a lie and a borrowed name, and had become quietly and without announcement something else entirely. She didn't name it, not yet, but she felt the shape of it large and solid and surprisingly unfrightening for something she hadn't been looking for. The formal complaint was filed on Friday morning. 4 families, 1 school. Gerald Ash's signed cooperation agreement. Thomas Carey's forgery analysis. Her father's letter. Colonel Webb's statement. Raphael's 8 months of assembled documentation, every piece of it built to stand alone and now standing together. Thomas Carey came out of the clerk's office at 9:47 with a stamped copy of the filing and held it up, and Catherine felt something in her chest. Do something she hadn't felt in a month. It was not relief. Relief was what you felt when the danger was over. This was something earlier than relief. The feeling of solid ground under your feet after a long time of not being sure it was going to hold. "Vale will be served today," Carey said. "By noon." "How do you think he'll respond?" she asked. Carey considered. "He'll be calm about it. He's always calm. And then, in about 48 hours, when his lawyers have read the full filing and he understands what Gerald Ash gave us." He paused. "He won't be calm anymore." She looked at Raphael. He was watching her with that steady attention she had come to know, like a room she lived in now. The quality of being genuinely seen, not performed at, not managed, but actually looked at by someone who was paying real attention. 48 hours, she said. "Give or take," he said. She nodded. She looked at the stamped copy of the filing in Carey's hand. 4 families and a school and her father's letter, and 8 months of quiet, patient, furious work, all of it now officially and irrevocably in the public record. "Then we wait," she said. "We wait," Raphael agreed. But his voice carried something underneath the word, something that was not patience and not urgency, but was closer to certainty. The quiet certainty of a man who has been working toward something for a very long time and can finally see it from where he's standing. She felt it too, and walking back down State Street in the late summer morning, with the city going about its Friday business all around them, Catherine Vane thought about her father's kitchen table and his careful handwriting and the letter he had written to no one and left for her to find. "I want there to be a record that I questioned it." There was a record now. There were 4 records and a school and a judge and a man who had kept faith with a debt that had nothing to do with money. And Vale calm, patient, systematic. Vale was about to be served. The ground had shifted. He just didn't know it yet. But in 48 hours he would. Vale was served at 11:43 on a Friday morning. Catherine knew the exact time because Thomas Carey sent word by messenger, and she was standing in the kitchen reading the note when Martha set a cup of coffee in front of her without being asked and said, "Well, now we find out what he's made of." She already knew what Vale was made of. That was the problem. He was made of patience and calculation, and the particular kind of cold intelligence that didn't break under pressure, it redirected. He had been doing this for years. He had 4 families and a school and a business partner's death behind him. And he had never once lost composure in front of anyone who could use it against him. She drank the coffee and waited. The first 48 hours were quiet. Not the silence of a man doing nothing. The silence of a man reading, planning, assembling. She had learned to tell the difference. This silence had weight to it, the specific gravity of something being constructed on the other side of a wall she couldn't see over. Raphael came to the manor on Saturday morning with Carey's latest analysis, and they sat at the kitchen table and went through it line by line, and somewhere around the 3rd hour, Catherine looked up and caught Raphael looking at her with the particular expression she had catalogued, the one that appeared before he had time to manage it, and he looked back down at the papers immediately. She let it pass. There was work to do. On Sunday, the quiet broke. The letter that arrived Sunday morning was not from Vale. It was from his attorney, his real attorney, not Ash, the firm he had used for 12 years, and it was addressed to Raphael, not Catherine, which told her everything about how Vale had decided to frame the battlefield. Raphael read it at her kitchen table and handed it to her without commentary. Vale was counterfiling. Not against the fraud claim, not yet. He was filing a motion to have the marriage declared invalid on the grounds that it had been entered into under fraudulent misrepresentation. Specifically, that Catherine had represented herself as Raphael's wife at the Hargrove Gala before any legal marriage existed as part of a scheme to defraud Vale Capital of a legitimate debt collection. She read that sentence 3 times. "He's trying to invalidate the marriage," she said. "He's trying to establish that the marriage was part of a fraud scheme," Raphael said, "which would reopen the estate to the original debt terms without the legal protection the marriage provides. It would also—" He paused. "It would call into question my standing in the fraud case. If I'm her husband, my involvement is protective. If the marriage is fraudulent, I'm a co-conspirator in a counter-scheme." She set the letter down flat on the table. "He's not attacking the case. He's attacking the person making the case." "Yes," Raphael said. "Which means the forgery documentation, the other family's Ash's testimony, none of that goes away. He knows he can't make that disappear, so instead he's trying to make me disappear from it. Can he succeed?" Raphael was quiet for a moment. Honest quiet, the kind that meant he was actually considering the answer rather than assembling reassurance. If a judge decides the marriage was entered into as part of a fraudulent scheme, it complicates things considerably. Not fatally, but considerably. What do we need to prove? That the marriage was not part of a scheme. That it was a real decision made by 2 real people under circumstances that, while unusual, don't constitute fraud. He held her gaze across the table. "We need to prove it was genuine." She looked at him. He looked at her. The kitchen was very quiet. "Is it genuine?" she said. The question was simple. It was also the most complicated question she had asked anyone in years, including herself. Raphael set down the letter he was holding. He was quiet for long enough that she felt the question land and stay, which was different from the quick silences he used for processing. This was slower, personal. From my side, he said, it has been genuine since before I had any right to call it that. She heard every word of that, the precision of it. Before I had any right to call it that. A man who had been watching her father's situation, who had known her name, who had been at the gala on that specific night, and had been telling himself, apparently, that none of it entitled him to feel what he felt. How long? She said. He didn't look away. I met your father 6 times over 8 years. He talked about you the same way every time, not like a man talking about a child, like a man talking about someone he genuinely admired. I knew your name. I knew how you managed the accounts. I knew you argued with him about the south pasture fence, and were right. He paused. When Vale started moving against the estate, I had already decided I was going to do something about it. You walking up to me at the gala was... He stopped. Was what? She said. The moment I'd been waiting for without knowing I was waiting for it, he said. Quiet, completely honest. The expression on his face, the one she had been watching appear and disappear for weeks, now simply present, making no attempt to leave. Catherine Ashford. Catherine Vane sat at her kitchen table in the house her father had built and looked at the man across from her and made a decision that had nothing to do with debt or documentation or legal standing. Then we prove it, she said. Whatever they need to see, we show them. Catherine. Not for the case, she said. I mean, yes, for the case. But that's not the only reason. She held his gaze and didn't look away, because she had been looking away from this for 2 weeks, and she was done. From my side, it stopped being about the arrangement somewhere around the 2nd day. I didn't say anything because I thought it was just crisis. Proximity. Desperation making things feel like more than they were. She paused. It wasn't any of those things. The kitchen was absolutely still. Raphael stood up from the table and came around to her side. Not quickly, just with the directness of a man who had stopped having a reason to stay on the other side, and he sat in the chair next to her instead of across from her and said, I need you to be certain. Not because of the case, because I will not have you uncertain about this and feel obligated because of the paperwork. I'm certain, she said. I have been certain since you crouched down in front of my chair and told me the truth about why you wanted to help me. No one has done that without being asked. She looked at him. I'm not uncertain, Raphael. I'm just new to it. He reached across the table and took her hand. And it was the simplest gesture in the world, and also the realest thing that had happened in this kitchen in a month. And she turned her hand over and held on. All right, he said. All right, she said. Outside, Martha was in the garden telling the horse something instructive. The summer morning pressed warm and golden through the windows. On the table, Vale's attorney's letter sat face down where Catherine had put it very deliberately face down. There was still a fight ahead. They both knew it. But they knew it together now. So, the hearing was set for the 3rd week of August. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Vale's attorneys filing motions, and Raphael's responding, and Thomas Carey working what Catherine was beginning to think of as a personal vendetta against irregular notarizations, and Colonel Webb preparing his statement, and Gerald Ashe being quietly terrified in his office on Devonshire Street. And through all of it, the thing that had been unnamed in the kitchen on Sunday morning settled into the daily life of Ashford Manor, like furniture finding its right place, not with drama, not with ceremony, just with the quiet inevitability of things that were always going to be true eventually. He stayed for dinner on Monday. She asked him to simply and directly, and he said yes the same way. Martha made a pot roast and set 3 places at the kitchen table without being asked, and then sat down with them herself, which was the clearest signal Catherine had ever received about what the cook thought of the arrangement. So you've been watching out for this family for 8 years, Martha said to Raphael about halfway through the meal, with the directness of a woman who had decided formality was someone else's problem. I've been aware of this family for 8 years, he said carefully. The watching out is more recent. Martha pointed her fork at him. Her father would have approved of you." "Martha," Catherine said. "He would have," Martha said serenely. "He told me once that what Catherine needed was someone who was quieter than she was and smarter than she knew. He was particular about both requirements." Raphael looked at Catherine. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything, but something passed between them that was warm and private and required no words. "Thank you, Martha," Raphael said. "I'll try to be worth the specification." Martha made the satisfied sound and went back to her pot roast, and Catherine looked at her coffee and felt something in the center of her chest that was so uncomplicated and so genuine that it took her a moment to recognize it as happiness. The first major twist of the hearing week came not from Vail, but from the Philadelphia family. The fourth case, the one Raphael had a letter out to, responded on Tuesday, 8 days before the hearing. Not with a letter, but with a man. He arrived on State Street at 8 in the morning with a satchel full of documents that had been assembled over 2 years by a merchant named Daniel Holt, who had never met Raphael Vane, and had been building the same case from the other end independently because his wife had found the same irregularities in the same kind of amended terms and had the same bone-deep refusal to let it stand. His wife's name was Clara Holt. She had sent her husband to Boston with 2 years of work and a letter that said, "I understand you are the man who is finally doing something about Edward Vail. I have been waiting for you." Catherine read the letter and then read it again, and thought about her father's careful handwriting and a woman in Philadelphia she had never met who had been counting the same numbers and arriving at the same conclusions and waiting for someone to be the beginning of it. "She's been working this alone for 2 years, Catherine said. "Yes," Raphael said, "with no legal standing, no husband willing to front the claim, just documents." "Just documents," he said, "meticulous ones." She looked at Daniel Holt, who was slight and serious, and had the expression of a man who had been handed a mission by someone he trusted completely and intended to see it through. "Tell your wife," Catherine said, "that she isn't waiting anymore." He looked at her with something that was almost relief. "She'll be glad to hear it, Mrs. Vane." Clara Holt's 2 years of documentation joined the filing that afternoon. The case now had 5 families and a school and a cooperating attorney and a paper trail that went back further and was more independently assembled than anything Vail had anticipated when he filed his counter-motion. Yet, Vail's attorney requested an emergency meeting on Wednesday. Not a hearing, not a filing. A private meeting away from the court between himself and Raphael only. Raphael told Catherine before he went. He told her everything the attorney had said in the request letter, which was consistent enough with the terms they'd agreed on that she trusted it, and he came back 2 hours later and sat down across from her in his office on State Street and said, "He wants to settle." She went still. "On what terms?" "Full discharge of all estate debts yours, the other 4 families, and the school. The prior claim withdrawn. The dormant lien voided." He looked at her steadily. "In exchange for the fraud case being withdrawn and sealed." Sealed. Gone. Vail's method, his 12-year business of constructed debts and forged amendments and patience going quietly into a sealed file where it would never see a courtroom. "No," she said. Raphael looked at her. "No," she said again. "He gets to discharge the debts and walk away and do this to someone else in 3 years. The case goes forward." "Catherine." His voice was careful. "The debts discharged includes yours. The manor is free. The $4,800 lien disappears. Everything your father owed gone." "I know what it means," she said. "And I know what sealing the case means. There are people in this city who haven't found their forged amendment yet. There are families who haven't gotten the letter because the debt isn't due yet. Vail is patient. He has cases in reserve. If we seal this, we hand him the ability to start over." She looked at Raphael. "My father wrote that letter because he wanted there to be a record, not for me, for the record, for anyone who came after him." She kept her voice flat and clear. "The case goes forward." Raphael held her gaze for a long moment. "The case goes forward," he said. "I told him as much. I wanted you to know it was your call." "It was always my call," she said. Yes, he said. It was. The hearing lasted 2 days. Catherine sat beside Raphael in the courtroom and listened to Ash's testimony, to Webb's statement, to Thomas Carey walk Judge Elliott through the forgery timeline with the precise pleasure of a man who had been wanting to do exactly this for months. She listened to Vale's attorneys argue that the marriage was fraudulent, and she listened to Raphael's attorney point out that a marriage performed in a judge's chambers with proper documentation and witnesses was by definition not fraudulent, regardless of the circumstances preceding it. She listened to her father's letter read aloud in a courtroom in the flat official voice of a court clerk, and she pressed her hands together in her lap and breathed through her nose and did not cry, because her father had written it to make a record, and the record was being made, and that was exactly what he had wanted. Vale sat at the opposing table through all of it, with the composure she had expected still contained professionally calm. But on the second day, when Carey presented the full forgery analysis alongside Daniel Holt's Philadelphia documentation and Ash's complete list of the fraudulent filings, she watched Vale's composure develop a quality she hadn't seen before, not cracks. Vale didn't crack. He was too controlled for that. But the stillness changed texture. It became the stillness of a man holding something very heavy and beginning to feel the weight. She recognized it because she had felt it herself. At the kitchen table 3 weeks into this, with $43 and a deadline, and no one willing to stand between her and the man now sitting across the room. The difference was that when she had felt that weight, she had stood up. Vale stayed seated. Yunk. Judge Elliott ruled on Friday afternoon. The compound interest amendment, improperly filed, unenforceable. The prior claim, forged, voided. The dormant lien, unverified disbursement, suspended pending investigation. The fraud case, 5 families and 1 school, referred to the Commonwealth's attorney for criminal proceedings. Edward Vale escorted from the courthouse by 2 men who were not his. Catherine stood on the courthouse steps with Raphael on one side and Thomas Carey on the other, and Daniel Holt slightly behind, and she heard the ruling settle into her bones, with the weight of something that had always been true and was now official. "It's done," Carey said with the satisfaction of a man who treated justice as a professional accomplishment. "It's not done," Raphael said. "The criminal proceedings." "For today," Catherine said. "For today, it's done." She looked at him. He looked at her. The summer afternoon was hot and clear, and the city moved around them with its ordinary Friday business, indifferent and unaware that something had been decided on these steps that mattered to 6 families and a school and a man who had lost a business 4 years ago and rebuilt himself into someone who could stand here. "For today," he agreed. She took his hand. Not the formal way, not the way they'd walked into the gala, but simply fingers threaded through fingers, the grip of 2 people who had decided to hold on. He looked down at their hands, then up at her. The expression on his face was the one she had been watching appear and disappear for a month, and it was not disappearing anymore. It was simply there, open and real, and completely unguarded. "Your father said, 'Look after whoever needs looking after,'" she said. "He did. I don't think he meant it as a temporary assignment." Raphael Vane looked at Catherine Vane on the courthouse steps in the late summer of 1815 and said with the quiet certainty of a man who had stopped calculating and started knowing, "No. I don't think he did either." The south pasture was green by September. The horse's leg healed. Martha got paid 6 weeks back, and a raise she said she didn't need and accepted anyway. Thomas Carey got a formal letter of commendation from the Commonwealth's attorney, which he framed and hung in his office, and denied being pleased about to anyone who asked. Colonel Webb became an unlikely ally, not because Catherine forgave him easily, but because she understood that people were capable of better than their worst moment, and that a man who showed up to make it right deserved the chance to. He testified in the criminal proceedings without hesitation. She respected that. Clara Holt came to Boston in October. She was a small, precise woman with ink-stained fingers and the expression of someone who had been right about something for a very long time, and was only mildly gratified to have it confirmed. She and Catherine sat in the kitchen at Ashford Manor, and went through each other's documentation for 3 hours, while Martha fed them both, and Raphael and Daniel Holt conducted their own separate version of the same conversation in the parlor. At one point, Clara looked up from a ledger and said, "Your father was meticulous. These records are extraordinary." "He taught me," Catherine said. "Then he taught you well." Clara paused. "My husband says you're the one who refused the settlement." "Yes." "Good," Clara said simply, and went back to the ledger. The criminal proceedings against Vale took 4 months. He did not go quietly, which everyone had expected. He filed motion after motion, and his attorneys were skilled, and there were 2 weeks in November where Catherine genuinely did not know which way it was going to fall, and spent 3 consecutive nights not sleeping, and being very honest about that when Raphael asked. But the paper trail was real. The testimony was real. Ash, terrified and protected and therefore honest, was real. The ruling came down in December. Edward Vale was convicted on 6 counts of fraud, 2 counts of document forgery, and 1 count of conspiracy. Vale Capital and Holdings was dissolved. The assets were used to settle the debts he had manufactured. Ashford Manor was free and clear. She told Raphael the night the ruling came through, standing in the kitchen with the official document on the table, and Martha quietly finding reasons to be in the back of the house. "It's over," she said. "It's over," he said. She looked at the document. She thought about the first letter 3 weeks after her father died. The words rearranging and not rearranging, no matter how many times she read them. She thought about $43 and a bad-legged horse, and a gala, and a stranger by a window, and a question she had asked in desperation that had turned out to be the most important question she'd ever asked. "Stay," she said. He looked at her. "Not for the estate," she said. "Not for the arrangement. Stay, because this is where you belong, and we both know it, and I'm done pretending either of us doesn't." He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, and she stood up, and he took her face in both hands, the way a person holds something they have been careful with, and are done being only careful with, and he said, "I have been trying to leave you room." "I don't need room," she said. "I need you to stay." "Then I'm staying," he said, "for as long as you want me here." "I want you here for all of it," she said. "The accounts, and the bad leg horse, and the south pasture, and Martha's opinions, and whatever comes next." She looked at him directly the way she had looked at Vale across the dining table, and at Webb at the gate, and at her father's letter on the kitchen floor, with clear eyes and nothing hidden. "All of it. That's what I want." He kissed her the way people kiss when they have stopped being careful about it, without performance, without strategy, with only the honest weight of feeling that has been waiting for its right moment, and finally found it. Martha's opinion, offered the following morning over coffee without being requested, was that it was about time. Catherine told her she was insufferable. Martha said that was also genetic. Raphael, reading the account books at the kitchen table with his sleeves rolled up and a cup of coffee going cold at his elbow, said nothing. But the corner of his mouth moved in the way she had catalogued from their first conversation. The ghost of a smile that had, over the months since a summer gala, and a borrowed name, and a desperate question to a stranger, become something she would spend the rest of her life being glad she had asked for. Her father had trusted a young man with $8 and a quiet directive: look after whoever needs looking after. The young man had grown into someone who understood that looking after didn't mean standing in front of a person and blocking the wind. It meant standing beside them with your hands open, letting them fight their own fight, and being there when the fight was done. Catherine Vane had come to the Hargrove Gala with $43 and a deadline, and no one in her corner. She had left with the one person who would still be in her corner when the last document was filed, and the last motion was denied, and the land was green again